Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Andre Eng, owner and president of House of Knives. I'm proud to have with us Brian Misko from, some of you guys know him better as Barbecue Brian. How you doing tonight, Brian?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and finally we've got some weather, unlike last time we did this live event, right? You can actually be
Listen,
outside without getting wet.
I'm glad we chose Tuesday, Andre, because if we were going to do this prior Sunday, man, it was like a high of 12 degrees here. That was not an enjoyable day. This is much better.
Yeah, I agree. And like you had pointed out earlier, right? No one's staying up watching hockey games or any playoff basketball games, right? What else better to do but to learn how to perfect the perfect steak, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
You know what? It's Father's Day this coming weekend, and what better to prepare for Dad? And if you want to get the tips to cook a great steak for Dad, why not? And I know you're not watching hockey, so why not? Let's join in and do this. And even dads are joining in, so yeah, you can either validate or verify exactly what you know, or maybe learn a few things tonight. So let's see
Yeah,
how it goes.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I was just camping on the weekend with some friends, and my friend said to me, she goes, you know what? I went all out and bought this beautiful steak for my husband or for the family to have kind of a special evening at home, and unfortunately, the steaks got ruined, right? And I hate hearing stories like that, right? I mean, food is too expensive to waste, and it's all about the knowledge, right? And who better to learn from? And I told her, I said, you know what? We have world champion pitmaster Brian. We're going to do a great live event so you can perfect the perfect steak. So I said, make sure you tune in tonight.
So, you know what, Andre? Thank you, and I'm glad that you invited me to talk about this because, there are people in the Lower Mainland that have had this experience, and I've done a state class is what I'm thinking of, and I've done a state class also in Wichita, Kansas, at All Things Barbecue, and then in Langley a couple of times, and
Mm,
that class lasts about 4 hours in
wow.
duration, and there are zero recipes involved, and it's that how much content there is to share. And so we're not doing 4 hours tonight. We're going to give like the Coles notes, if you will, and the
Yeah.
abbreviated version. So that's what's coming up here, and
Yeah.
I'm going to dive right on in. So you ready for this?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so look, there's going to be three key things that I want to talk about in regards to beef steaks. And there's different types of steaks. You can get a pork steak. There's, of course, cauliflower is a rage that was on for the last couple of years. But nonetheless, we're going to focus on beef steaks. And the very first thing that I want to talk about in particular with that is in Canada is the grade. And the consumer information historically has been extremely poor for the merchant to communicate what the grades are of the beef. And it is very critical because it really divides out the good, better, best, if you will, of the
Hmm.
beef classes that are there. And so the terminology you're going to hear are A, which you'll rarely, if ever, find in a retail store. Double A is very commonplace, or triple A is probably what is the best that's available for consumers. And if you can, prime would be another word that you might find. And that is the top of the Canadian beef grading system is the prime grade.
Yeah.
Now, so double A, triple A, and prime are the what you and I as consumers are going to see. Now, if you go into a store, Andre, the retailers are getting better. They're going to mark that usually on the label or have a great big sign on the wall and tell you exactly about their beef program.
Yeah.
If they're not
Yeah.
putting that on there, if it's not on the wall, if you stop the guy who's filling the case and you say, hey, can you tell me what grade of beef this is? And they kind of look at you blankly and they say, it's just the good grade, right? That means they have no idea, and it's probably really low on the totem pole, if you will, for
Yeah.
yeah, if you know
Yeah.
what I mean. So not
Now,
you might have better choices.
yeah. Hey, Brian, the grading system, from what I'm aware of, it's pretty consistent within North America, but I assume when you get outside North America, it's a different game.
Well, each country will do their own guidelines on the grading system. And
Okay.
Canada has a wonderful beef grading system, and
Yeah.
it is a benchmark for many other countries, including Australia and Europe and so on. The terminology is very different in the United States, where you'll get choice and select. And prime will be the terminology that you'll run into, and they're different grades as well. I
Yeah.
find A, double A, triple A very easy to remember. What's the difference between choice and select? For example, I don't know. I choose or I select. Anyway, but so in Canada, we've got, I think, a pretty easy system to remember. And yeah, it's fantastic. There's a lot of science behind how it's graded, but it reflects on the breed of the animal, the weight of the animal, the overall before the animal is harvested. And it's always done on the 13th rib to separate on the loin and look at their marbling and so on and so forth to get the actual marking from the inspector to get the grade. So
Yep.
it's not random, and it's not just, hey, that's a AAA cow. Well, how do you know that until you actually get in there
Yeah.
and actually do the grading?
Yeah, that's an important piece of information. We're always about the empowerment of making sure you know what you're buying as a consumer, whether it be a good knife, a good barbecue, or a good piece of meat, right? And I think when I think back growing up, I had no idea there are different grades of meat. So, as a consumer, you just think, a steak is a steak is a steak, but, it's about empowering and being knowledgeable what you're purchasing.
Perfect. Now, I said there's three items. So grading is one. The second one is aging. And this information isn't necessarily passed on to the consumer, but it is very critical, particularly beef steaks. And if you think about this, is as the inventory is processed for the beef supply system, that's cash on hand, if you will. And so the longer that it waits around getting to the consumer and somebody paying for it and funneling that back through the process, it's cash just sitting there waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some merchants that will try and get it through as fast as they can. For example, 7 to 14 days aging of the beef. Now, that's kind of the bare minimum that you want on that. And it's going to be interesting to say this, but the longer the better. And
Yeah.
so if you've got a good merchant, 21 days, 28, 35 days are fantastic, the range that's there. You'll have some specialty merchants that will be 45 or 60 or 90-day aged on their beef program. You're getting
Yeah.
into specialty stuff and you're going to pay for it, but you're going to have a different experience. I think that all makes sense on the aging. So the tip here is don't be shy on getting a 28 days to age steak as versus something you have no idea is a mystery steak on the aging.
Yeah.
It's a better steak.
Yeah. It's one of those rare occasions where the older is better, right? And I think with
Yep.
aging too, the thing that I use an analogy. I tell people it's like buying a Christmas tree, right? If you want the bigger Christmas tree or the bigger birchwood tree, you're going to pay more for it because there's an investment of time for the grower to get it to that stage. And in this case, it's usually the butcher that has to put it aside. But also there's shrinkage that happens as well the longer you age the meat. Correct, right?
And exactly right. So let's say that the whole side of beef was 800 pounds, and the butcher buys that, it's 800 pounds, and he's put it in his locker. There's circulation, there's moisture control, there's humidity
Yeah.
control, there's UV lights often to control for bacteria and growth and so on. So it's a very controlled environment. And imagine 3 weeks later, instead of 800 pounds, they only have 550 pounds.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
bought it for 800 pounds. He's already magically lost 25% of the carcass weight, and that's what you and I are paying for as a consumer.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, quality over quantity, the longer it ages. Awesome.
Now look, the third topic, third area, so grading, the aging, and now is the cuts. And this is where it gets a lot of fun. And I want to, if we can add in our third camera, I've got
Sure.
a magic, a wonderful assistant today is going to third camera, and she's going to show the cuts that I've got here on the table. And so this is where you get into different, if you will, beefiness or textural components or granularity, depending on the dish and how you want to cook these things. That depends on the cut. Now, in this tray that I have here are 3 different cuts and 2 different grades, if not 3 different grades. On the end where my hand is right here are ribeye steaks. And the really characteristic of that is a big rib eye of fat that's in the intermuscular tissue that's right here. This would be known as a prime rib if it had the bone on there, a prime rib roast, a rib steak, or a ribeye steak. Those are the terminology for those guys. Now I'm going to switch these around a little bit here, and I'm going to go on the far end, and there's 2 steaks right here, and they're both strip loins, which is, if you can imagine and visualize a T-bone steak. On a T-bone steak, you have a big meaty piece, and then you use a smaller piece on the other side of the bone. The small side of the bone, that's the tenderloin. The big piece on the other side of the T-bone is this one right here, the strip loin.
Nice.
This one right here, where my fingers are on it, a AAA Canadian beef, and this one right here is an extra special one. And so, Andre, we forgot to mention this. This one right here is a Wagyu grade beef, right
Wow.
here on a strip loin. And so I'm going to take a pause here for a moment, and we're going to get back and show you the Petit Tender right here. But we forgot to mention where these steaks came from. And so here, where home for me is here in Vernon, and one of my friends and one of the companies that House of Q has as a vendor that provides House of Q products is called Valley Direct. They're based here in Vernon and in Armstrong, but they also do beef, and that's where these steaks came from. So we wanted to mention Valley Direct as a great supplier in the North Okanagan, all through the
Nice.
interior, and they've got some fantastic products. Beyond beef, all of the produce, there it is on the screen. So all of the produce and specialty value-added products that they have at Valley Direct. So
Yeah.
Valley Direct, thank you very much for this lovely beef, including Wagyu beef, which is from Brant
Wow.
Lake Farms in Alberta.
Wow. So Brian, Wagyu is kind of a unknown. Well, I think a lot of consumers understand and always associate it to beef that comes from Asia, of course. But Wagyu, I know, is basically produced all over the world now. Now, what type of characteristics and specifications classify it as Wagyu? Is it all about the marbling? Is it not?
So there's a couple of things that come in there. So Wagyu would be, it's ungraded in Canada. So Health Canada and the CFIA does not have a criteria for the grading of Wagyu beef in Canada. They
Yeah.
rely on US or Australian benchmarks for the grading system. And when they're doing the grading of the animal after it's harvested, they're looking for the color and the density of the fat content, the cap, for example, right here on the outside, right here
Mm.
on the edge. So they're looking for the color and the density of that. And then the second thing that they're looking for, and it might be hard to come on the camera here, is the intramuscular marbling of the fat tissue or the collagen tissue throughout the steak. And that's where you get into different levels of the Wagyu beef. And so it's not a breed of animal, it's more of a method and a culture surrounding how the animal is raised. And it is a very soft, pliable texture. It is a beefy steak. It's buttery. It's just a dream to cook and a dream even more to eat. So
Yeah.
we've got one of those. And again, thank you for Valley Direct for bringing that in for us. And that's going to be a treat tonight. So again, both
Yeah.
strip loins though, Andre.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've
Now,
had Wagyu beef meatballs before, and it's incredible. Like you said, if you've never experienced it before, I think the word that you use, buttery, describes it totally, right? Just melts in your mouth.
there's a lot of fat content or what people
Yeah.
call fat content, and it really shouldn't be called fat. So sure, a cap of density that, yeah, it's okay to do that. But intramuscular wise, it's called collagen, and it actually dissolves and gives the moisture and the juice that you and I love as eaters of
Yeah.
steaks, as carnivores.
Yeah.
So yeah. Now listen, I want to get on to cooking. I'm getting a little bit ahead, and I'm
Sure.
getting into the 4 hour range, and I want to be careful of this and just keep marching on. So the very last one that I want to point out is this beautiful one right here, and it looks like a pork tenderloin, right? Kind of a
Yeah.
long, and there is some strand nature to this, and this is called a teres major or a petite tender, and it's part of the shoulder clod, right off of the scapula or the bone that's there. And there's, if you have the bone, it has a wing, it comes to a center, it goes up to a cusp, and there's two muscles on the both sides. This is one of those ones. And I got introduced to this in 2010 when I was a chef at the Winter Olympics. It was a fantastic thing to do, and I love this one. And so I'm going to dress this up and get these on the cooker so that we have some steaks to show. Now, so cuts. So just kind of wrap up the cutting of those ones, Andre, and I want to get onto some olive oil, and I'm going to put on some peppered bovine is my seasoning on all of these steaks tonight. And then I'll
Yeah.
get talking into some of the cooking methods.
Sure. Sure. Brian, what's your favorite cut out of all the different ones?
You know what? I don't even have one here. My good cooking partner for at the beginning of time for House of Q was Glenn, and he coined this phrase for me, and I've been using it ever since, like 10, 12, 15 years ago. And he said, my Tuesday night steak. And it's kind of like, yeah, okay, it's not your Sunday night, or it's not when your mother-in-law is over, or your date night when you're, trying to impress a girl, right? And that would be a sirloin. I really enjoy, believe it or not, and the sirloin can actually be kind of, it can be put by the wayside and be considered a pedestrian-like steak. And if you've got a great aging, an incredible grade of beef, and it's cut really well and really nicely trimmed, that sirloin steak is a treat. And
Yeah.
I do enjoy that. But then again, I love a Petit Tender, I love a flank, I love a ribeye. So yeah, there's lots there to discover, Andre.
Yeah, and it's nice having the variety too. Like in our household, I would say the go-to in our family is the ribeye out of all the steaks. But I enjoy a fillet now and then. It's not, it doesn't have the, I guess some people would say the flavor content, but I just love the tenderness of it. Or flank steak is very underrated, right? You can never go wrong with flank steak. Just grilling it simple and just, it's nothing like it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, listen, as people are looking in, so is there a recipe tonight? Well, not really. So, if you've got, think back on what we were talking about here. So, if you've got a great grade, like AAA, Prime, Wagyu, and you've got and just a simple olive oil I'm using tonight, and a great seasoning, salt, pepper. This one's got a little bit of cayenne in it for some heat.
Yeah.
You don't need any eye of newt. You don't need any ylang ylang or like all these funky ingredients and stuff like that. Or you don't want to marinate it for 3 days in some teriyaki sauce or whatever.
Yeah.
That's really, and I don't want to get too far on a rant here, but that's really disrespectful if you want to go down that path. If you've
Yeah.
paid $40-50 for a prime piece of beef that you want to cook one night,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you really want to skimp on everything else and just obliterate it that way? No, not so much. Respect it.
Yeah.
So for me, a little bit of olive oil, some salt and pepper is perfect, and it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah. We
So that's
do
what
the
I did on
same.
all.
Yeah, we do
Pardon me.
the
Go
same
ahead.
in our family, just very basic, some oil, fresh salt and pepper. And in our culture, maybe it's ingrained with us being Asian, but we do soy sauce is great too because it's basically salt and it really gets and absorbed in the meat really easily.
It does have some wonderful flavor, especially with some ginger or garlic on the
Yeah,
surface for some surface flavor. So
for
we can
sure.
elaborate at length about marinating as versus brining and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to do that. We're going to focus on some steaks. So there's how are we doing so far? Good. Are you learning some stuff, Andre? Like, are we doing
Yeah, it's
good content?
absolutely really good. Yeah, absolutely. I think, Brian, one thing that the avid user often, these little subtleties you probably do as I do. If you're grilling that steak, you don't want to take it right out of the fridge and right onto the grill. You can take it an hour before time and kind of let it get to room temperature. Make sure you kind of pat it dry, get rid of all that moisture, right?
Well, there's two parts of what you just said. Do you need to go to room temperature? And my answer would be not necessarily. It can be even partially frozen and go directly to the grill, and it all comes down to your actual ability of how you're managing as your cook is, and that's why I point behind me is the two different grills. There's my left and my right here, and so there have been some rather nerdy people that have done uh, for example, frozen steaks as versus one that's at the room temperature, and just look at the performance of the moisture content and so on. And the performance of the frozen steak was right up there with the one that sat around.
Really?
So, and it all, yeah, and for example, and why I opened the lid behind me is that I'm doing one of the cooking techniques is a reverse sear. So one steak, the Petit Tender, has been smoking, and then I'm going to sear it now to give it that crust on the outside. And these ones that I've just dressed with the seasoning, I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to sear them to get some color. And if
Yeah,
I got some great color, I'm going to put them even on the smoker to finish to the done temperature that I'm looking at. So that's
yeah.
kind of two's technique. I rattled that through quickly. Did you catch all that?
I did. I love, reverse sear has been kind of the hot trend you see out there. I started doing it with my prime ribs. So basically, for those of you who don't know, reverse sear is opposite of what a lot of people maybe have been brought up or taught to do, where, you put on uber high heat and you sear the hell out of it and get a nice crust, then you turn it down low. Reverse sear is the opposite, where you put in your steak or your roast really low temperature at about 200 degrees for, when I've done ribeyes up to 40, 45 minutes at really uber low temperature, pull it out when it's at about 120. And then you basically just sear it for about 30 to 45 seconds per side, let it rest, and it's perfect.
So this is the Petit Tender, and it was in the smoker. It was 112 degrees as I removed the probe off of this one.
Oh,
It's extremely rare. It's still extremely pliable. It's got some great smoke character that's there. And now on the grill is when I want to get some flavor or some searing on it. And hopefully that's not going to get too loud on the searing, but that's when I want to get some color on there. Now, if you've preheated your grill just like this and you want to keep that lid closed, I've got some great temperature on that grill grate. I want to keep that closed to keep that heat in there and just monitor things real quickly. But in the meantime, on the other steaks that I did, let me close this lid on the smoker. So the other ones that I dressed, the ribeye and the strip loins right here, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to put them on here right beside these other ones and get them cooking as well and watch them for color. And I almost sound like I'm overemphasizing this, but when you're cooking this way, and I run into this all the time, we've got some great sizzling going on here. There goes the ribeye and one more ribeye right here. You got a nestle in there? Okay, perfect. Now, oh, I got a little bit of color in there. That's awesome. Now, okay, close the lid. Keep some heat in there. So I emphasize cooking for color, and we eat with our eyes first. We want something that looks wonderful and looks very tasty, and on and on. I'm just gonna get that tray out of the way. And so we want to high heat sear, or if you're using charcoal, almost a char on the outside. Don't cook till it's done at this point, just for color. And I'm kind of emphasizing that because if you've got a grill that's got two burners, where one side will be super hot, you can get that
mhm.
sear, and then you can move it to the other side and allow it to finish for doneness. And in our last session, Andre, we talked about these guys using thermometers to get exactly the right doneness, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Best investment you can have, whether you're roasting in home or out on a barbecue. I'm always shocked and amazed how many people will grill their meats and not use thermometer, and they're just guessing. And, especially beef is not getting any less expensive, that's for sure.
No, it's not. And in my opinion, as a placeholder right now, and I've been doing a bit of homework on this. The farmers are losing per head a tremendous amount of cash. Like it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per farmer, depending how big their farm is, of how much money they're losing with their processing they're having their animals processed. And there's a big gap between the distribution, the marketing, the sales, to get to the merchant in an abbreviated fashion. But their prices, if they're at $20 to $40 a kilo right now, I'd put a $10 bet. It's not a very good bet to have this bet, but probably raising another 10 to 15, if not $20 per kilo as we get through time here. Through the whole supply chain, people are just don't have the money to make the money that they want to make it viable for what they're
Yeah.
doing. In particular, and most importantly, in my opinion, is the farmers. They're losing money, Andre.
Yeah. I know
Now
it's sad
look,
to hear what's
I've
happening
got,
out there.
we've got so we've got the camera coming in on that one that was smoked. I want to
Yeah.
monitor the temperature. I'm already at 135. I want to get that off and start resting that already
Yeah.
and allow that just to go on the side here and rest. I'm going to turn over some of the other ones that we put on. I have no idea how many minutes that was. It doesn't really matter. There we go. We've got some great color on these.
Hey, Brian, talk a
Oh, that's
little bit
freaking lovely.
about grill preparation and surface. Now, uh, you, like I do, I always like to put oil on my meat before I put on grill, but some people will grease their grill as well. Do you recommend that?
Either or both. And it
Okay.
depends on the grill grate that you have
Yeah.
in your grill. For me, I love doing it on the meat because it also allows as an agent to allow your seasoning to stick on the surface. And
Yeah.
at this point, and when you are seasoning, is to be rather liberal with it. It sounds like you're going to put way too much on, but just with the physical movement, the caramelization, and the surface tension that comes when you're on the cooking environment, you're actually going to lose a lot of that seasoning. And so you almost need to over season to compensate with it, or almost
Hmm.
do a dual seasoning at the beginning and then when you're finishing. And don't
Yeah.
forget both and do that in there. So, but then on some cast iron grates, for example, I do like doing both the meat and also the grate. And if you've got some stainless steel ones, or if you've got some aftermarket products like grill grates where you can get some incredible temperatures and searing on there, yeah,
Yeah.
you can season them. It helps with cleanup as well.
Yeah. I like seasoning it before I
And
put it on grate because depending on what type of spices you use, like I love using Montreal spice. It's got some bits of garlic in it. I like the flavor of it cooking on the grill rather than just putting it on after the fact, right? It's a different flavor.
now, Andre, I like a medium rare steak. How about you?
Same, absolutely.
Same.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can get this on the camera here. Let me spin this around. And so the temperature of that strip loin right there is 90 degrees. I'm going to go to a different one. This is the Wagyu one.
Yeah.
And again, well, they're 92
92.
degrees. And up,
Yeah.
this is the Petit Tender right here. Are down to 85 degrees. And Fahrenheit, folks. And what I'm shooting for on my thermometer is about 125 degrees before I remove it from the grill. Now, let me close this lid and we'll get some more heat in there. So if we can have the camera come back in here on these guys. The two ribeyes that we cooked tonight, Andre, are super thin. They're about ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch thick, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And a thinner steak is going to cook far more faster than those thicker ones. And their thinner ones are harder to cook than a thick steak. So keep that as well as a tip in there. So if you're going to the butcher, ask for a thicker steak. Absolutely. So when I go in and I'm getting something really special, I'm looking for a 2-inch thick steak. It's easier to cook than a thin one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's more forgiving, right? The thin ones can get away on you quick, right? Some people wait too long before they turn it, and it's already done.
Before you can say boo, it's overdone, right? And so that's why I'm monitoring these ones as well. I don't want to overcook that Wagyu steak. Trust me on that one.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Brian, a question for
now,
you before you go on. The piece of meat that you took out of the smoker that you do in reverse sear on, are you monitoring for a certain temperature before you pull that out, or are you doing it by time?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. And so I'm usually between 110, 115 degrees before I remove it from the smoker and then go to the sear on that one.
Yeah.
And so for me, and then that's when I'm comfortable to get to the finish temperature depending on what I'm searing on. So if I've got a chimney with charcoal in it and a grate on top of a chimney, if folks know what a charcoal chimney is, I'm going to be searing at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not going to take very long to get a crust on the outside. So that's when I would smoke to maybe 115, 118 degrees and get a real quick sear on there. And that's when I get to the right doneness on that.
Okay. And your temperature you have on your grill, are you 3/4 high, medium? Where are you?
This one's fairly hot. It's a cast iron grate in here. I've got it on its maximum temperature. It is a very low fuel consumption on this beat up old baby Q. I've had it for like 10, 12 years, and I beat the hell out of it. And I love cooking on. This is one of the only gas grills that I have. It's portable. It's been all over North America, this thing. And as I traveled around, I love cooking on it. And it does a pretty decent steak. The way, at least maybe I'm just used to it. That's the way I like it.
No, I like working with the cast iron. And just to clarify for people out there that may ask, well, what's the difference when you buy a new barbecue, right? They'll ask you generally, do you prefer cast iron grates or stainless steel? Cast iron, just like in cookware, is your best heat retention material. So it takes longer to heat up, but once it gets hot, it stays hot. Is that your preferred grill as well, right?
Well, I do love the heat capabilities and functionalities of the cast iron on the grate, but from the maintenance and the longevity, stainless steel, and particularly ones that are very thick, like your pinky finger thick rods that are there, that would be my preferred one is a stainless steel. They're the cast irons I find a little bit more maintenance. They can get away with on you from delaminating or rusting and so on. So you really need to be on top of that. I'll leave my cast iron to be in the kitchen as a skillet and so on.
Brian, when you're, we just had a question come in about resting period. How long do you like to rest your meat for until you serve it?
You know what? Not all that long. It's very important as the process, and some of these are done for the other ones. But you know what? I'm shooting for 5-10 minutes on a steak. It depends on the mass or the size of whatever you've cooked. For example, an 18-pound turkey can rest for an hour. It'll still have some energy in there, some heat, and it'll
Yep.
still be a very rewarding eating experience. A
Yep.
real thin ribeye that I've got here, it's gonna drop in temperature, but it's gonna relax and have some great benefit from
Yep.
having that resting time. And
Yep.
so it only need a few minutes, 5 minutes or so.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, that's about how long I typically rest mine for. There's always that temptation when you're hungry to pull it off the grill and just start cutting right into it. But then, when you do that, of course, you lose more of the juices inside the meat. You got to give it that period and be patient with it.
There's a lot going on when you cook this, and so I'm making sure I'm not overdoing this. And so both the ribeyes, yeah, let me get this one off that Wagyu. It's at about 130 degrees right now. I'm going to check that other Petit Tender here. It'll be a little bit longer to cook, and you can see right here, it's still only 110 degrees, maybe on the other end a little bit longer. So I'll
Yep.
get that in here, kind of balance that out on temperature. But yeah, so how would you know that if you didn't have a thermometer, folks? And so the analogy I use is if you're not using a thermometer, it's like driving a car without a speedometer. And all you do is hang your head out the window, and if your hair
Yep.
is moving, that means you're moving. But if cars are
Yep.
zooming by you, maybe you're too slow, right? I
Yep.
think I mentioned that analogy before.
Yeah, I love that one. The other thing that, Brian, I'm sure you've seen this used when I did my culinary training, it was one that was taught to us is, the thing with the fingers, right? How you move your fingers along and the density of your palm changes. So you go from kind of rare, medium, well done, right? It gives you a rough
I
idea,
would,
but it's not as perfect as a thermometer.
you know
That's
what?
for
I think Andre, you just said it. Use it as a rough idea. Use it as a guideline, right?
yeah, yeah,
And there are steak competition cooks, the Steak Cook-Off Association in North America, and some of these guys are extremely well practiced, and they'll not only have it by the clock, they'll wear a stopwatch, they'll clock things for particular movements and things of that nature,
yeah.
but they're playing for thousands of dollars, so just like me as a barbecue competitor.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that we do a lot of are these personal thermometers, right? These little thermometers I've shown before that just individually sit inside each individual steak. So when you have guests over, if some people want theirs, medium, some rare, some well done, it's tough to manage on the grill. What's what? So these personal button thermometers just stay in the steak the whole period of time, and you can gauge the temperature that way. So as I tell people, right, there's nothing worse than not only overcooking a steak but undercooking it, right? In terms of, bacteria concerns and whatnot. So yeah, saves a lot of aggravation.
Here we go. I just pulled off that last steak there, Andre. And you know what? This is perfect because they've been resting. Some are ready to cut up. But you know what? I want to make sure I've got the right tool to do exactly that. Tongs are very handy to do that. I'm going to put on some gloves. But you know what? Tell me about knives and steaks. Now, at the beginning, I would use, for example, something like this, a butcher knife or a trimming knife, to help
Yeah,
me with if there was some silver skin or some tissue that I wanted to remove. That was
yeah,
on the Terrace Major. I did that before we started the session. But the trimming side is one thing, but now that they're ready to slice up, this is where I need your input.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just going to turn off the barbecue cam. I think we're done with that, right? Are we right?
I'll show some of the cuts here, what it looks like on the doneness side, but we can
Oh,
come
okay.
back in if you want.
Sure. I
But
was
show
just
me some
zoom out
knives.
now. Sure.
Yep.
I'll show you a knife. All right. So I brought this guy with me, Brian. Have you seen this one before?
What kind of a steak are you cooking, Andre?
Check out the serrations on this baby. I could take down my Christmas tree in the yard with this. So I brought this along just for illustration purposes. So obviously this is a serrated. This is the world's largest bread knife. I don't think I brought this to grills at the time. I only had the chef's knife, but this has
You
nice
had,
serrated.
yeah, the chef knife, that's right.
Yeah. So most people, when you think of steak knives, right, people think of a serrated knife, and people are like, "What? You can get fine-edge steak knives? Why would you want that?" So a quick history of a steak knife. The steak knife originated back, for centuries, and it's funny. I did a bit of research into it in terms of how it progressed, and they said it was really the French that designed the steak knives the way is what people know now with rounded tips and not points. So back in the day when they had really pointy knives like this, they said the problem was people used to use it and pick food out of their teeth with it. It was almost like a big toothpick. So then they started rounding off the tips of the steak knives like this. so it's rounded edges. So it wasn't really until the Second World War, when technology advanced to the point where they figured out how to harden and temper steel, that people were basically using butter and dinner knives at the table. But because they didn't stay sharp, someone came up with the idea is, why don't we put a serrated edge on here, because they'll stay sharp longer. So when you think of it, Brian, when you're at a restaurant or even at home, what cutting surface are you cutting on most times when you're enjoying your steak?
I like these type of boards. I've got a stash of these type ones,
Oh yeah, yeah,
or a resin board. Often white, but there's different colors. But nonetheless, those would be my go-to cutting boards.
yeah. Those are knife friendly. But if you're sitting at the table, more often than not, you're probably eating off a plate, right? So it's
The
porcelain
ceramic
or it's
type.
ceramic. Yeah. So as we tell people from a knife friendliness standpoint, the worst cutting materials you can use are marble, granite, glass, anything hard that's going to really kill your edge. So I'm just going to illustrate on the board here. I'm going to move my camera just so you can have a better view of what's going on here. So when you look down at a plate here, 9 times out of 10, right, if you're cutting with it, you're hitting on porcelain, right? And that can really dull the blade quickly. So when you think about how a serrated edge is designed, I'm going to pull back my big guy here back in a second here. So describe to you kind of what's happening here. So a lot of people will come in, whether they're buying a bread knife or steak knife, and they think a serrated knife is a serrated knife, just like we said, Wagyu beef is not Wagyu beef. So what we have here is, these are what we call scallops, right? You have inner scallops and the teeth. So the very pointy parts, of course, the peaks are what we call the teeth. The points in between the teeth is what we call the scallop. So in a good serrated scallop knife, the scallop should do most of the cutting for you, not the teeth. If you have a knife that has a lot of teeth, and I'll bring in this little guy here, I don't know if you can tell, but this one here is almost like a hacksaw. It's similar to what you used to see on TV, a Ginsu knife, a Miracle blade. So the whole premise of teeth, the rule of thumb is, the more teeth you have on a knife, the more it's going to tear than cut. So what's the advantage of having teeth on the blade? It's more forgiving. It stays sharp longer. So if you think about this exaggerated, right? I'm cutting on porcelain. You can see the light coming through, because what's hitting the porcelain now? Is it my cutting edge or is it the teeth? It's the teeth, right? The teeth help protect the actual cutting edge in between what they call the scallops. So you're cutting back and forth, right? That's why we have a lot of people think serrated knives cut better than plain edge knives. They don't. What people really like about serrated knives is they're more forgiving, right? They stay sharper longer. So in recent years, it's funny when you think about an experience. So I'm going to tell you a quick story, Brian. When I was up in Kamloops several years ago, I was in, I love a great steak like anyone else, and I love a great prime rib. And my feeling is, when you go to a restaurant, try to order something that they specialize in. In this case, they specialize in prime rib. So I asked them, what do you recommend? They said, we do great prime rib. I said, done, medium rare. I was just sitting there savoring and waiting for the meat to come out. And of course, they brought it out 10, 15 minutes later, beautifully presented, medium rare cut. The coloration was really nice, exactly the way I wanted it. And the waiter left the table, and I grabbed my fork and knife they had there, and I started cutting into it. It's like, my first perception was, my God, this is tough prime rib. But the reality was, the knife couldn't cut. It was so dull. And, the waiter came by about 5 minutes later, and he did his usual, well, how was everything tonight? How are you doing?
Yeah, how's it going?
I said, actually, not good. And he kind of stopped me, looked at me. He's like, what? What do you mean? What's not good? I said, I hate to tell you this. And I did one of these, right? I took their knife, I held up my wrist, and I said, look, I did this across my wrist. I said, your knife, I couldn't even, commit Harry Carey here if I wanted to. It's so dull. And he didn't know what to say. I think he looked at me like, are you for real or are you just kidding, right? So he said to me, he goes, oh, do you want to speak to the manager about this? I said, yeah, okay, yeah, why not? Sure. Just for fun. So a couple minutes later, guy walks up with his tag. I think John was his name. And he goes, hi, I'm John. I'm the general manager. I understand there's a problem. I said, John, I love a great piece of meat like anyone else, but I said, you guys have a beautiful restaurant here. You serve this beautiful piece of meat. I'm sure you put tons of resources behind finding out where to source the right meat from, making sure your cooks prepare it properly. They don't under or overcook it, and you served it to me beautifully. But then you give me this knife that, I did the same thing. I said, that can't cut anything. What's my perception, right? That this meat's not very tender. I said, it's not a very good experience. And he looked at me, and then the light bulb kind of went off, and he goes, oh, okay, I understand. And I almost said to him, I said, what's next? Am I going to have to use styrofoam cups to drink my wine out of, or plastic cutlery, right? When you go out and you enjoy a beautiful meal, that's part of the experience, right? And I'm just
Yep, very
blown
much
away
so.
how many times, even in the US, where you can spend, $100 on a beautiful steak, and they bring you this, steak knife that barely cuts anything, right? So, from that point onwards, I give my business card, and there's a few restaurants around Vancouver that we've serviced over the years with fine edge steak knives because it's just that experience, right? And I gave you a set of beautiful Shun steak knives, I believe, a couple of years ago. I'm sure when you
You did,
use those,
absolutely.
right? It's
Absolutely.
like butter, right? It's like butter.
It makes a big difference. Absolutely.
Yeah, huge difference. So I'm just going to show back down the plate. I'm going to show you something here. So when you're looking at knives, I've got 3 different knives here. So this is that kind of sawtooth edge knife here. I don't know if camera can pick up on it. It's pretty, it's basically like a hacksaw blade. So the great thing with these is they stay sharp a long time, but they don't cut very nice. So back in the Ginsu or Miracle Blade days, they always show it cutting a tin can and then still cutting some fruits or vegetables, but they never would show it cutting any type of raw meat. Why? Because raw meat is tender and it would just tear it apart. The better ones from a multi-serration is what we call that scalloped edge, where it's got a bit of both. It's got some teeth, but it's got that scalloped edge between it. But the best ones, most versatile, are your fine edge ones. So this one will look familiar, Brian. This is one I believe I gave you. This is the Shun Shima steak
Yep.
knife. Fine edge on it. And the other thing is, what people don't recognize and realize is a fine edge steak knife is more eco-friendly. Why? Because when this dulls, you can have this reservice just like any of your other kitchen knives in the household. If you have any serrated knives like these, once it dulls, you're throwing it in the garbage. And the reason why these are much more inexpensive is because when the manufacturers make a serrated knife, they don't have to rely on the quality of the steel for the knife to stay sharp like you would in a plain edge steak knife. They'll use typically one of the lowest grades of steel possible to make the scalloped edges because they know it's basically disposable. Whereas when you're looking at a fine edge steak knife, like this one from Schon or this one here from Wüsthof in Germany, both of these are using the same grade of steel that you would find in your chef's knife or other knives in the household. So you can maintain and steel these the same as your other knives, resharpen them indefinitely. So, and like I said, the experience is second to none.
So Andre, in the store, at a House of Knives store, and if a customer came in and said, "I want to look at steak knives," of the variety that you have, and trust me, there is variety, folks. If you haven't been in a House of Knives store in a long time, how many would be the serrated type, and how many would be like a full blade?
Yeah, if you'd asked me that a few years ago, I would say it was almost 75-25 serrated. But in recent years, I think we're just the opposite now in terms of what we offer. And because people are getting more educated about it as well, right? So one of the most common things, Brian, people will come in and look for steak knives. And what I love to ask people when they ask for steak knives, I said, how do you like to cook your meat, right? Do you like it well done? Do you like it medium rare? Because that can affect how your steak knife cuts, right? If you're the type of person that loves it well done all the time and it's like leather, then there's nothing wrong with something that works like a hacksaw, right? So one final thing I'm going to show you here, Brian, back on the plate here. So this is a
Sure.
small illustration. This is probably the most unique steak you've ever seen, right, Brian? That's about your
What do you got
1.5
there,
inch,
dude?
2 inch. This is a piece of foam. And the reason why we love using foam to test sharpness of knives is because in the knife factories, actually, Wüsthof in particularly in Germany, when they sharpen their knives, they use a piece of foam, the guys on the line, and they'll test the sharpness of a knife based on how well it cuts the foam, because foam simulates, it's got cellular structure like food, it simulates how well it's going to cut. So if I was to take this piece of foam here, and you won't be able to hear it, unfortunately, like I can. This is a multi-serrated knife here. If I'm cutting here, I really have to saw for it to cut. Versus
It literally
something.
sounds like a saw.
Could you hear that sound? Yeah, it's
Absolutely, it
dramatic.
sounds like a saw.
Yeah, versus the fine edge one here, goes through it
Oh,
like
sure.
butter, essentially, right? It's effortless. So,
See, I'm
yeah,
the fine edge kind of guy. I gotta say that. I'm gonna say, I'm gonna put that down. I'm the fine edge guy.
yeah. Well, lastly, too, especially when you have guests over, I was lucky enough several years ago have my chef instructor come over, and I had her over for dinner, and after 30 plus years of her teaching me, and we had these great baseball-sized fillets, and we had all the steak knives laid out there, and I just loved her expression on face after when she took her first cut into the steak. She cut into the steak, put it in her mouth, and she looks at me. She says, "My God, that's the most tender piece of meat I've ever eaten in my life, or the sharpest knife I've ever used." And I said, it's both, right? I mean, if you want to make an impression, right, why would you give one of your guests a dull steak knife where they're having to literally saw away at it, right?
Absolutely, and just like you explained in your story I've had a wonderful experience until this when you gave me, it may as well give me a spoon to try and have my steak.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how often do you, so Brian, with all the different meat that you love grilling, do you have a go-to cut that you just love cooking and eating?
You know what? It's all over the map. I do like from the steaks or beef steaks all over, from ribeyes to sirloins is one of my preferred ones. I can't turn down a strip loin. Petit Tender or Terrace Major, I love very much so.
Yeah.
But there's so many things, and it depends on what I'm doing. So from my Mexican friends in Sonora, is learning some of the carnitas and so on from the tacos that we want to make. Is you're not going to do that with a ribeye, and you're going to want a flank or different cuts that'll help you with what your goal is with that one. But it depends on what kind of an experience you want for your eaters, which may be a tip. If you're planning something, you got your mother-in-law coming over, your friends, or something that you want to have a great night, is making sure you're thinking through what type of an experience you want to present and then thinking through on those steaks.
Yeah, for sure. It's like having a nice wine with the right glasses that you're going to use versus a plastic or styrofoam cup, right? It's everything throughout.
Or
Hey,
the
Brian.
great knife to cut up your steaks.
Yeah, exactly. You want to make experience. Hey, Brian. Today's Tuesday. We're only 2 days away from Thursday. Tell us what's going on Thursday.
Yeah, you know what? It's a big week for me. I've got an incredibly busy week this week, and so Tuesday, I'm going to have my Tuesday night steaks tonight, which is lovely, and I'm glad that we got an opportunity to share this with you. And the apron looks very familiar because this exact apron is the style of apron that we wear on Fire Masters, which is on Food Network Canada. I'm one of the contestants on this week's show, which is Thursday evening on Food Network Canada, 8 p.m. Pacific. Don't know if you're in Alberta or Saskatchewan or wherever you're viewing this broadcast. Believe it or not, Andre, I think a friend is watching this from Qatar this evening or this morning or whenever time it is. I looked at my phone to see who's chiming in here. But nonetheless, that's on Thursday night here in Canada. I'm one of the contestants on there. It was a phenomenal experience. Now, Thursday night, the broadcast is at 8. And at 9 p.m., right at the end of the show, I'm going to do something special. I'm going to have both of the other cooks that I was on camera with, and that would be Chef Phil the Grill, who's from Phoenix, Arizona, and Chef Pam, who's from Guelph, Ontario. All three of us are going to do a session just like this at 9 p.m. on Facebook Live, and we're going to have some question and answer with people about the show. So hopefully you'll join us at that time as well.
Nice. Now, I got to ask, Brian, with a name like Phil the Grill, is that what you said? Grill the Phil or Phil the Grill?
Phil the Grill is his name, his moniker.
Is that his real name? Or is that
Phil Johnson is his name, and everybody calls him Phil the Grill. Just like everybody calls me Barbecue Brian, they call him Phil the Grill.
You know what they call that, right, Brian? That's called destiny, right?
Destiny? I love it.
Good. Well, I'm just checking a thing if any other questions came in about anything, but I think we're pretty good. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to shoot them in. But hey, Brian, great episode tonight. I knew it would be. Who doesn't love steak, right? If you're a carnivore like we are, like you said, you can never learn enough about meat.
You know what? I would love to show. Let me see if we can do this real quickly. I want to show you the inside of that Petit Tender, Andre.
Yes, I love to see it.
You can try and lick your camera, but it's not going to be any beneficial. I'm going to dive right in the middle here and slice this open. And
You want us to turn on the barbecue cam to get close, Brian?
yeah, it's right here.
Okay, let me.
And I want to show the inside of this.
Oh yeah.
And come on in there close, real close. And so it's very tender. It's got just a beautiful texture on the inside of here, and it's very lean, but it has a lot of intermuscular tissue or collagen there. This particular cut, even though it comes from the shoulder, is very similar to the tenderloin. It's a tiny piece of meat, about the size of a pork tenderloin, but it's one of my favorite ones, Andre. I hope you see that right there. It looks pretty gosh darn good, don't you think?
I'm hungry. I already had dinner, but I'm ready to eat again.
We haven't eaten, so I've got my steaks to eat here. So
oh, okay, you're lucky.
I think we're gonna do that. So you guys watch in on Thursday. I'm really glad we could share some stuff tonight about steaks. Happy Father's Day, Andre. Happy Father's Day to you too.
Yeah,
I know
same to you,
you're gonna do
Brian.
something wonderful with the kids.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Brian, one last question. Someone just shot in here about tri-tip.
Sure. Tri-tip.
What is a tri-tip?
Absolutely. So tri-tip is part of the sirloin, which is just above the rear hips on a cow, and it's a triangular shaped cut of, and it's really hard to call that a steak. It's usually sometimes quite sizable, 3 pounds, even up to sometimes 4, depending on that animal, and so it's quite sizable. It needs to have something that's perfect to go with the reverse sear that we talked about here, where you're going to smoke to 110, 115 degrees, maybe even 120, and then get some color on the outside of that.
Yeah. I put in the same
that's
category.
That's a fantastic thing to do.
Someone asked about, is it a steak or a roast? Because it's kind of that in between, right? I look at it very similar to flank steak, right? It's called flank steak, but it looks more like a roast when you see it because it's big. You have to kind of cook it in its whole piece, and then you basically serve it up family style, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, who's going to eat a whole flank steak by themselves? Not that many, right?
Not that many, but there's times I've been tempted. Awesome. Hey, Brian, all the best on Thursday, even though you already know the results. You don't want to be spoiler. I'll definitely tune in and check it out. But, hey, thanks for all your time.
Look, I'm going to give you the tip, Andre. It was awesome.
Okay, sounds good. So if I probably couldn't call Vegas and place a bet, right?
Always do that.
Always do that. Okay, sounds good. Hey, Brian, and all viewers out there, thanks for tuning in tonight. Thanks for giving us, part of your evening. If you enjoyed what you like, please leave your positive comments. And Brian, we'll have to do this again, right?
We've got more to share. I know that you and I can do a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Take care, Brian. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Bye, guys.